In this tutorial we are going to make this animation using Blender add-on MotionPro. We will use the scene Cozy Kitchen made by Nicole Morena. I prepared the scene for animation by subdividing, joining, or separating some objects. You can download the scene from the link down below. First thing, we would animate the floor in the -X direction using curve 6 and changing the curve scale to 1.7. Then animate the right wall on the X direction using curve 11. Same for the left wall on -Y. As for the right top wall, we will use curve 10 on the X direction. And -Y direction for the left side. For the right shelf we would use the curve 9 on the -X direction. And Y direction for the left one while changing the scale to 2. For that shelf we would pick curve 8 on the -X direction. And the same direction for trim 1 using curve 7. For trim 2 we will use the curve 8 in the Y direction. And the middle small trim we will just scale it in. For window 1 sill we will use curve 6 on the -X direction. Same for the window 2 sill on the Y direction. For that top window 1 choose curve 6 with scale 1.5 on the -X direction. Same for the other top window on the Y direction. That window we would spiral in around the X-axis from direction -Y. The second window around the Y from the X direction. Then rotate the door around the Z-axis. For the ivy in the floor, we would use the bend floor preset in the X outward direction. Same for the top ivy on the -Y inward direction. For the side ivy we would use bend wall preset in the Z outward direction. And that's the result so far. For the floor tiles we will use the floor pop in preset. Choose the collection and the Y direction. Don't forget to hide the collection in the scene. Because this scene scale is really small, we got this issue. But we can fix it easily by moving the pop and empty a little bit in the Y direction on its first keyframe. Then press I to set the keyframe. For the wall planks we will animate each on the Z direction with scale 1.5 and using curve 5. Then add one keyframe in each direction so they appear gradually. And that's the result. As for furniture we would start with that counter on -X direction and curve 8. And the countertop on the X direction and curve 2 scale 1. The first chair we would rotate it on -X axis. The second on X axis. And we would rotate the table on the Z axis. As for the tablecloth we would use the bend floor preset on -X outward direction. Then we would spiral the armchair in around the Z axis from the X direction. And the billow around the Y axis and from the Z direction. Because the scene scale is small, we might decrease the height in which the billow falls from. Then press I to set the keyframe. We would spiral the chair around the Z-axis from -Y direction. Same thing for that chair. As for these two chairs, we would rotate the around the Z and minus Z axis. And that's the result. You can start animating the objects in the scene using any of the presets available, like rotating the basket on Z axis, or wiping the mushroom stem on minus Z direction. For these lamps, rotate around minus X and X axis. Then move the origins to the top. For the string light, you can wipe it on the Z direction. And rotate the light bulbs on the X and minus X directions. As for the books, we would spiral them around the Y from the X direction. Because the scene scale is small, we could decrease the X distance a little bit. Then press I to set the keyframe. Now keep on choosing presets for the rest of the objects. For the tree trunks in the back, we want to rotate them around the Z axis right after the walls appear. As for the ivy plants, we can use the bend walls preset from the Z direction. And for the leaves under the shelf, we would rotate them around minus Y axis. We could rotate the flower pots around the minus X axis. Then move the origins to the top. The last thing we need to do is to animate that point light to start after the walls appear. And for the light particles to be scaled in at the end. Now that's the final animation rendered using cycles. Download MotionPro today and start animating.